funk man himself, Scott Chu. Look at the funk today. Oh my gosh.
I had to do it. I had to do it. Especially after Ryan Bloomfield gave me crap the other day for not having my classic blue sunglasses. I felt like I wouldn't be giving the people what they came here for if I didn't go all out for this. I got a haircut yesterday just for this.
Oh my gosh. Well,
and also my wife's maternity pictures, but for this.
There you go. I've been looking forward to this one in particular. And you know, when we revealed PLV to start PitchCon, it was a 2-hour presentation. We went a lot into it, a lot more about pitching stats. But honestly, I think the takeaway for a lot of people, as it should have been, is that PLV in many ways is a hitting stat more than a pitching stat. And something that we've had in the back end I've showed is our tool that we have to analyze pitches. We have our pitch PLV tool that we aren't making public quite yet, but there's also a hitter one. And Scott has been messing around with that. And oh boy, Scott has a lot to tell us about it. I don't know what he's going to showcase yet. I have no idea. I'm excited just like everybody else. So Scott, take it away. Show us what you found.
You guys have no idea how amazing this is and how much I've played with this for the last 24 hours or so. And actually even more just today, because our guy Kyle Bland just continues to make updates to this. It's so exciting. I mean, so let me get my presentation going so that y'all can see it here. It is called beautifully Total Eclipse of the Chart. I want to talk about building narratives because that's really what these rolling charts do, right? We use rolling charts not to find a single stat. That's not what they're good for. What they are good for is helping us build narratives, which is what we do all off season, right? We look at stats, we do all these things. We try to think of the narrative of, was this player getting better? Are they getting worse? Are they going to stay the same? What can I expect for this coming season? And we use projection and things like that. But rolling charts are going to be something that if you're not using, you need to start using because they're dynamic, they're beautiful, they're a lot of fun. So I always like to quote this. It's this Heraclitus quote because I'm a geek and I did philosophy in undergrad. It says the only thing that is constant is change. One of the reasons we call these rolling charts is that they move constantly. No player has a flat line. Even when you see that a player hit, even Chris Davis, who hit 247 for 4 consecutive years, the number of days that he actually hit 247 was 4, right? Or 3, the 3 years in a row on the last day. But he rarely hit 247 throughout the course of a season. And rarely did he have a 50 plate appearance sample that he hit 250, right? That's because it's constantly changing. This whole game is just a game of adjustments, right? And because of that, we're always trying to create narratives because human beings are storytellers. We're trying to understand what's going to happen. So we look to what has happened and particularly what has happened recently, right? And what's different now is we have so much data. I mean, just think about 5 years ago, right? Or 6 years ago, pre-StatCast, right? The most advanced stat was BABIP, right? Oh, we got BABIP now, right? But we're so much beyond that now. But despite our best efforts, despite all the data we have, we fall into a lot of narrative traps. There's a couple reasons for that, right? So one thing that we have is that we used to build narratives the old way. I don't know if you guys ever did this. I did this, right? I made these little charts. I thought these were so great. I'd say, hey, look at this player. His strikeout rate has, it changed. It went up and up. Oh, and then it went down in September and October. That means something. And, oh, look at the walk rate. It took a big spike in August and September. And then, oh, the OPS, it got, it was fine. And then it was good. And the WRC plus, it was good. I thought this was such great analysis at the time. But, it has a lot of flaws to it. Obviously, there's still valuable things about this, right? This data here, it's useful, right? It's not like I'm saying there's no use for strikeout rate or walk rate or anything like that. But what I am saying is, and again, these charts and graphs and these little tables, they're easy to make. They're easy to customize. They're simple to understand, right? But they're also kind of blech because months, for example, are arbitrary. What is the difference between July 31st and August 1st in terms of a baseball season? Nothing, right? Why do we start saying, oh, August was different than July when that's not really how it happened, right? Also with the graph or a table like that, it's really difficult to visualize the trends, right? I can see it, but it kind of just looks like this number, this number, this number, this number, right? Might as well be a bar chart. I don't see, I see trends sort of, but I'm not seeing what I really want. Right. And up until about, 24 hours ago, I had a better way of doing this. And I now call it the pretty good way because we had rolling charts, right? I'm purposefully obscuring the name here because I want to make this like a little bit compelling, right? But we can now look at these 15 game rolling averages, right? So this is from 21 to 2022. And I've got strikeout rate and walk rate here. What's great about this is number one, it is a rolling chart. That means it's good, right? But the other thing that it does is it sort of shows you trends, right? We see towards the end of towards the end of this chart that the strikeout rate really starts to come down, comes down to a lower point than it had ever really been for a 15 game sample. We see the walk rate is higher than it had ever been for a 15 game sample. And what's kind of cool about this too is, we used to talk a lot about stabilization points, right? We used to have all of these articles about when does this data stabilize? When is it, when is it sticky? When does it mean something? That's not really how these work, right? Because the moment you say it's stable, it's still going to keep moving. Like, how long is this chart flat for any given time? Right? Like maybe one game, right? Like maybe they had the same strikeout rate for 2 consecutive games, but that was about it. So we're always kind of like moving it around. So we're looking at these 15. Now that we have a 15 game average, I'm not just looking at game to game to game. What I'm looking at is a sample size in and of itself. 15 games, usually going to be about 40 to 50 plate appearances, depending on where you hit in the order and how good your team is at offense, right? So, and we know that strikeout rate does start to have some meaning after about 50 plate appearances. So we know that we've got some kind of meaningful data here. So it's there. But again, we're also missing a lot of really important reference points, right? So, we're also going to we can look at other stats too, right? Because we know there's more than just strikeout and walks. Why was he striking out less? Why was he walking more, right? So we look at things like O swing and zone swing. We see the zone swing actually didn't really change that much, right? Like that line you see through the middle there, Fangraphs has a great rolling charts tool. And it tells you what their season average ended up being with the red line. And you can see how the chart plays with it. And then you can see with O swing, you see this player did get better at not swinging so much outside the zone. But we also don't have right on hand here a couple of things. So what's really good about these kinds of rolling charts is that it's sample size and results all in one, right? Not only do we know like what that we know what the strikeout rate was from time to time to time. We also know that it has a sample size baked in. We don't have like these crazy one game fluctuations, right? We sort of got rid of a lot of that thanks to having it be a 15 game sample, right? And I can see how it changed over time. I got to see how that, I'll go back to it, but I get to see how that O swing got better over time. I can see that, right? Technically, this is 21 to 22, but I'll tell you that they played very few games in 2021. So it's mostly just 2022. And I can see, like, as the season went on, this player got better at swinging less outside of the zone, which generally speaking, that's great. And that tells me a lot about them. But it's also kind of meh now. Now, you don't know why yet, but I'll get there. Don't worry. I can only see trends. First, I can't tell you whether or not a change from the highest point on this chart over here and the lowest point, I can't tell you how much that means, right? Like it sounds like a lot, 40% to 20%. I'm sure that's great, right? But I don't actually know what that means in the context of the rest of the league. What is a normal, what is a normal O swing? What is a normal zone swing? I can look that stuff up, but it's not here on the chart. I have to already know that kind of thing. And, that makes it difficult to put into context. And I can see either the league average, which you'll see if you use StatCast and you use their rolling charts. I'll show you how to do that a little later. You'll see the league average, and that's kind of useful. And you can see the season average on Fangraphs, which, again, I showed you are these kind of dotted lines. You can show you, when you looked at their player page and said, what was their O swing in 2022, you'll get this number right here. But again, this number never actually happened for any sample, right? It was the average, but for no specific game did they actually have that, right? This movement is going from one game to another game. They never were actually there. So, which is not, it's nice to know that. But again, I don't have a lot of context for that, right? So, as Nick was alluding to, we've been talking to you about a lot of cool PLV stuff. We've been showing, they spend a lot of time showing you, I think, a lot of the cool things that we can do with PLV. And really, just to recap, if you weren't there for that or anything, the biggest thing about PLV is it really gives us a nice idea of how good was that pitch, right? Because the other thing about some of these charts like this doesn't tell me how often the pitch was, it was in the zone, but it was good, right? It was a good pitch in the zone versus a bad pitch in the zone, right? Or a pitch that was in the zone but difficult to hit right on the corner. It doesn't tell me for O swing how far they were from the plate. What was the likelihood that anyone was going to swing at that, right? There's a very real possibility that this player just ran into a bunch of pitchers that missed a lot, right? There's several divisions that have weak pitching. It doesn't give me any of that context. I see the general O swing, but what if pitchers just stopped pitching them? They threw them a lot more stuff outside of the zone, so it was easier to recognize. I don't have that context here in this graph because I only have how often they swung at stuff outside of the zone. I can't see, I could add more layers to this, and I'll talk about that more later. I could start to add that in, but then these charts become actually harder to use, right? So the thing about that PLV where we graded every pitch and we figured out what was the likelihood a player was going to swing at this? What was the likelihood that a player could turn this pitch into a single, a double, right? What is the expected average for this pitch? What's the expected slugging for this pitch, right? We don't have any of that context yet, but we do now. Thanks to Kyle Bland, the team that we've had here, that PLV stuff can give us a lot of information about hitters, because the biggest thing about hitting is that it's reactionary, right? Pitchers get to choose what they're going to throw, right? Pitchers don't have surprise sliders. They tried to throw it, right? Like they chose to throw a slider, and we know they're trying to hit their spot. But with hitters, it's very reactionary, right? And certain pitches can't be hit, right? A good pitch, you just can't do that much with, right? So our guy, Kyle Bland, came up with some really cool stats that I want to talk to you about. We'll have more of them available to you when we get to the PL8 launch. But we have these cool new hitter ability metrics that are based on PLV. They're based on how good are the pitches that they saw. They're based on how much better were they than our model predicted they would be against certain things. So with swing aggression, we can see how much more often a hitter swings at pitches given the swing likelihood of the pitches they faced, right? We're not just seeing how much they swung. We're seeing how much did they swing at things compared to how much we think they would swing at things, right? The likelihood that an average player would swing at that, right? Because a pitch right down the middle, most players are going to swing at that outside of certain specific counts. Whereas a pitch on the corners or top of the zone, they might be harder to swing at, right? They may hold up on those. So we bake that in. We have these likelihoods so we can see really how aggressive they are, not just how often they got pitched in the zone. We can see how often did this hitter swing at a pitch that we wouldn't necessarily have expected them to, right? Or that most hitters would have laid off. How much did they go after it? Which is really a better measure of what swing aggression is, right? It's more than just swing rate. It's more than O swing rate. It's about saying, okay, this was a pitch that everybody, most of the league or our model predicts that most hitters would have laid off, but they swung. That's aggression, right? How often did that happen, right? We've also got strike zone judgment. It's more than just walk rate, right? Because, the famous example is Yoan Moncada from like 2018, I think. One of the crazy things about it is he had this insane number of called strikes because of pitches that were right on the edge, right? But all we saw were like, oh, hey, look, he had a lot of third strikes that were called strikes. So we had some idea of his strike zone judgment, and maybe it wasn't the best, right? But now we have strike zone judgment, which is the quote unquote correctness of a hitter's swings and takes using the likelihood of a pitch being a called strike if they swung, or there would be a ball or hit by pitch if they took it. So every time they swung at that pitch, what was the likelihood of that being called a strike, right? We're using that to determine strike zone judgment. And if they took the pitch, how often would that have been called a ball, right? And we have other things that bake into that because we know that certain counts have more impact than others. We know that certain situations have more impact than others. We know that different types of pitches have other, that look, it looked like a strike and then it wasn't, or things like that. We're able to bake that in and create a stat for strike zone judgment. We've got decision value, right? So that's the modeled value, which is runs per 100 pitches. of a hitter's decision to swing or take minus what we think would have happened if they had done the other thing, right? So if they took the pitch, did they add to their team's offense by taking that pitch over what we'd expect to happen if they swung? Right now, a slider in the dirt, we know that if they swing, there was nothing good could happen, right? They're going to probably strike unless they're Vlad Guerrero Jr. or sorry, Vlad Guerrero Sr. that one time, right? Where he hit that bouncing ball in the dirt. But most of the time, we know that our model can predict that that's not going to be something that can be turned into damage, right? So we actually can look at how often did that hitter's decision to either swing or not swing impact what we expect to have happened. If they took a pitch that we actually expect a lot of players to swing at and do very little with, right? Or maybe swing and miss. If they took that pitch, we know that was a positive thing, right? Alternatively, if they swung at a pitch that, they could do something with, and if they had taken it, it just would have been an easy called strike. We know that that was a good thing because they took a swing, they took a chance to make that happen. We've also got contact ability. This is not just contact percent. Contact percent, which really focuses on when you swung the bat, how often did you make contact? That's cool, right? But what we've baked in is, what did we expect you to do? Not just did you make contact, but did we even expect you to make contact, right? Because we know that there's hitters with amazing hand-eye coordination, with amazing control of the bat. What they're able to do is make contact on pitches that we're surprised they could get to, right? I mean, Mike Trout will dig stuff out of, several inches below the strike zone that most hitters would miss. He can go down and get that, right? Stephen Kwan, another great example of a hitter who can take things that are maybe a little outside the zone, maybe difficult to hit. He finds a way to slap that ball. We want to be able to measure that ability above and beyond what we would expect to happen for that pitch. If you were able to take that slider that was right to the corner that we know most players would either not make contact with, or, maybe they would make, they'd swing and miss. We want to know if you made contact. We want to be able to record that. We want to be able to understand, because that's a skill. It's a skill to be able to make contact on pitches that are very, very difficult to make contact with, right? Now, in and of itself, it's not a total encompassing value of their hit tool, because maybe they shouldn't have swung at it. But we want to know their ability to make contact if they did choose to swing, because if you don't have this ability and you swing all the time, you're obviously going to strike out a lot. But you can swing a lot and not strike out a lot if you have great contact ability, if you can make contact with the things that are difficult to make contact with. We've also got power, which is kind of fun because it's how many more bases did you add when you made contact on a pitch above what we would expect, right? And this is for each batted ball event. So on a certain pitch, we might say, when hitters swing, the model suggests they're going to get about a single here. But if we know that on average you add, maybe a quarter or a third or a half of a base to that because you just hit the ball so dang hard, or you're just so good at hitting line drives or balls into the gap. If we know you've got that, let's grab that power model, right? It's basically X ISO on contact, sort of like WOBA-CON, which only measures WOBA on contact. We're now doing X ISO on contact. How many more bases on average did you get when you hit the ball based on what our model predicts someone would have hit the ball, right? And we've also got this sort of all-encompassing one, which is hitter performance. Every 100 pitches, how many more runs do they add based on what they do, right? Because some hitters are really good at just making contact. Some really are good at adding a bunch of power when they do make contact. Some are really good at making sure they never swing at bad pitches. Those kinds of things all can kind of come together, and we can see a hitter's overall performance, right? Because someone could have amazing contact ability, an amazing strike zone judgment, but because they have no power, there's just a cap to how many runs they can add per 100 pitches they see, right? Because they're not likely to hit doubles or home runs or something like that. So what are they really adding to the offense? Now, of course, none of these are fantasy stats. None of these are stats in any of your leagues because, even I didn't even know these stats existed until about 24 hours ago. So you don't have them in your leagues, but they tell us a lot about this hitter's actual ability. We always try to talk about this is a true talent 275 hitter, right? A true talent 22 home run hitter. And we're sort of using these things based on what we've seen in scouting and stats, but now we actually have those numbers. We have things that can tell us how that works, right? I will tell you that these will be available sometime after PL8 launches. I can't give them to you quite yet, but don't worry, I'm going to spend plenty of time telling you how these work and what these charts look like. So let me get right to it, right? This is going to be the same hitter we talked about in those other charts where they did swing at less things outside of the zone. They kind of kept the same zone swing, but their strikeout rate did get a little better and their walk rate did get a little better, especially at the end of the season, right? So what we actually know is this player's swing aggression never actually was high, which just remember this because I think it's going to surprise you a lot. But this player was never actually swinging a lot more often than we thought he would, right? He actually never even got to MLB average. We know that a swing, if we thought there was a, 65% chance this hitter was going, or any hitter would swing at this pitch, we know that actually for him, it was more like 60%. And at times it was even 55, 53% that he'd swing at this when a normal player would have been 65%, right? And it actually over the season got a little better, right? So he was less aggressive. Now that's not necessarily always good. So let's take a look at a few more things that can help us. Another thing you're probably seeing on this chart, which is so cool. Kyle added this just the other day. You can see not just the MLB average, but you can now see the percentiles, right? 25th percentile in swing aggression, 75th percentile, 90th percentile. That's the league, right? That gives you even more context. Yeah, sure, there's the MLB average, but how aggressive were the most aggressive hitters, right? We know that they were swinging almost 7% more often than we'd expect them to. Whereas the most patient hitters in that 25th percentile often swung, to 3-ish% less often than the normal hitter. That gives us this new context that we didn't have on those other rolling charts. All we knew was either the MLB average or where they ended up. We didn't know what it meant. Yeah, okay, so they were below average, but how much more below average? What, a player that was really patient, what would that look like? Right? Now we know we can see that because we've got the 25th percentile year end. What was their rolling swing aggression? This is what the 25th percentile looks like, which means only 1 in 4 hitters swung, were this patient looking to swing. We've got even more charts than that though, right? So we've also got that rolling contact ability. And we saw that this player actually started well below MLB average. In fact, was at times horrible, right? Like they were in the bottom 12% in the league in the ability to make contact over and above what we'd expect them to. But man, they shot up right at the end, didn't they? They went from someone who was well below average, right? In that sort of that bottom, that 10 to 25th percent, that area that's just really ugly. That means you're really not doing well. They went from there and always below average to by the time they got to the end of the season, their rolling 200 swing contact ability was almost to the 75th percentile in the league. That means they were almost as good as the top 25% in the league at making contact, despite all that time below 50%, right? That context is just amazing for us to have because it's great to know the trend. And rolling charts are really good at giving us a trend, but it also now gives us that extra context, right? Because just that number, that, 4%, that doesn't tell me how good that is because I don't know. I don't know what the average, a contact frequency above expected is good versus elite, right? Now I've got it. I've got 75th and I've got 90th. I can also tell you that these are normally distributed, which for you math nerds out there means it's mostly like a bell curve, right? Most of the stuff is packed between sort of that 25th and 75th percentile, and especially within that like 40th to 60th percentile. But to see a player take a huge jump from, again, at like swing 310 or so, they're in like almost the bottom 10% of the league to end at the top 75% in the league, or sorry, the top 25% in the league. That's amazing, right? That's a huge jump, right? We also can look at their power. Well, their power specifically was always amazing, right? When this player hit the ball, they added extra bases every time they got on it, right? Now we know from the contact ability that they didn't do this necessarily very often, right? They made less contact than normal, but when they did, they punished it, right? This player was in the top 10% of the league in adding power when they made contact, right? That's amazing, right? So when you add that to the contact ability, watch out, right? And we actually saw that if you go way back to those early charts that were like, man, they had a really good September and October. Yeah, because they started making way more contact above expected, and they always hit the ball hard, right? This person didn't need to hit the ball harder. They already hit it hard. So you combine these things, you get this amazing thing, right? And there's even more, right? Because this is cool, but there's even more depth that we can add to this by looking at their decision value, right? How often did this player make a decision to that was good for the team, that was good for the offense, good for adding runs, right? Because we see early on they did not. Oh boy, did not, right? That blue line right above their season average, that's the bottom 10%. This player was the worst. This player was the worst at making the right decision, even though they weren't aggressive. They were really bad at making the right decision whether or not to swing. And that's huge. But we also see as the season went on, they got a whole lot better at it. They got actually to the point where they were league average, sometimes even a little above that. And when you combine that with their ability to make contact, so when they swing at pitches that they're more likely to hit. And we know that when they hit them, they get a ton of power. That's exciting. Those are the trends I really want to see, right? This is everything I want to see in a player's growth, right? I want to see them make more right decisions. I want them, when they make the right decision, I want them to actually make contact. And when they make contact, I want them to hit it really, really hard, right? So who was it? It was our boy O'Neal Cruz, right? O'Neal Cruz was like this. And I know so many of you have looked at his overall lines and said, this guy, he really struggles with making contact. And that's true for a while. But man, he got so much better at it. But we always knew the power was there. This guy hits like 122-mile-an-hour screaming line drives. But we got to see that he started making better decisions as the season went on, which is hard to see in the actual results, right? Because those are by full plate appearances or full games, right? Now I can see it on a per pitch basis. How much better did he get at making the right decision to swing or not swing, right? And I can also see that when he did decide to swing, how good was he at making contact? He started the league making contact a lot less often than he probably should have, and he ended making more contact. And again, the power was always there. So now that we know that this was O'Neal Cruz, this just really changes the narrative that we built for O'Neal Cruz. Because I think a lot of people just thought, oh man, O'Neal Cruz, he's got to make more contact, right? But he did. He was doing that, right? Now, this doesn't necessarily mean he will in the future, but we know that as he played, he got better at all the things we wanted him to get better at, except for power, because he was already in the top 10% of the league for that. Like that kind of data. Just knowing that should at least make you feel much better or make you reevaluate what you thought about O'Neal Cruz before you saw this. All 7 of you that are watching this, you should really feel a lot either more confident or feel like you need to look more into O'Neal Cruz because you got to see how much this guy changed, right? And if I had just shown you this chart, this rolling decision value without the percentiles, it would still tell you like, wow, we got a whole lot better. But let's really think about how, like, yeah, he got better. But again, he only ended at league average. But with his kind of power and his contact ability, he only needs to be league average at making decisions, right? Because when he does make contact, he's going to crush it, right? This is amazing. Todd, you're going to get, or Zod Tola, you're going to get everybody killed if you do that. But like, whoa, like seriously, Kyle Bland, first of all, huge props to him, the way he was able to do this. He added those reference lines last night. I had to re-pull all of my charts today because of how valuable I thought those lines were, right? To give you that context of what is good, what is not, right? What is, what is average? Okay, that's average, but what does it mean to be good and elite, right? It means not average, but how not average, right? What does it mean to be bad at something, right? Yeah, below average, but how below? This gives us that context and we can see all of those things. It also gives us a good frame of reference for those lines because they can look very steep or very shallow based on what the y-axis says, right? If that y-axis is using very small increments, it could look like it shot up when in reality, compared to the rest of the league, it really didn't move that much, right? We'll talk about that more as we go. I do want to mention before I go any deeper into this, that these charts are not predictive. They're just incredibly descriptive, right? Uh, like they can't tell us this is necessarily going to mean they're going to continue on that trend because he certainly could not, right? It could be we go into next season and pitchers have figured out how to pitch to O'Neill Cruz and it nosedives, right? He starts making poorer decisions because they're giving him stuff that they know he's not good at. Or maybe he's trying something new with a swing and it's not helping him make contact, right? So this doesn't tell us what's going to happen in the future, but it tells us way more about what actually happened, right? Because that strikeout rate he had, good to know, right? Important, but not as good as knowing how he got to that strikeout rate and how he got better at controlling the strikeouts. That's what we want to know. So I'm going to go through a little bit. You probably want to know, where do I get these rolling charts? If you're someone that doesn't use them now, you want to know how to get them, right? So with StatCast, right? StatCast is one place to get these. And they have really cool stats, right? They've got those expected stats, but they have a very limited menu. You can only look at one at a time, and you can only use the stats they've already got set up. So I will actually take you to StatCast, right? We're going to look at a player who's always very fun. His name's Julio Rodriguez, J-Rod. And we can actually figure out what his rolling stuff was, not by like doing any math, God forbid, right? I went to law school, not math school. I don't know how to do any of that stuff, but they do. Basically, when you're on a player StatCast page, you just go over here below where it says StatCast standard and everything. Just click breakdowns. You click breakdowns, you get the rolling chart, right? Couple cool things you can do with this. You can pick your stats, right? For him, strikeout rate is a fun one. You get to see it come down over time to the point where he went very much above average to pretty average, right? That's pretty good. And I can even see, right now, you see all these little flat lines. That's telling me that maybe this sample size is a little big. And I can even get it a little smaller if I want to see it more dynamic. I can make it larger if I want to see, a more broad trend by saying, what was his strikeout rate per 100 plate appearances? The more sample size I add, the more sort of sticky, or the more that number is something I can really rely on. So just something to keep in mind. Yeah, all these, they have some pretty good stats here, but they don't have everything, right? So how do we get to more stats? We do that by actually going to Fangraphs. So Fangraphs, amazing rolling charts. They have tons of stats. They don't have the StatCast data, which is always really valuable, but they do have lots of other stuff that we can look at. I'm showing you here what the 15-game rolling average was for Julio Rodriguez and his O swing rate and his zone swing rate. It actually doesn't look like it was all that promising compared to the strikeout rate chart that I was just showing you a second ago. But we do have, ways to get those kinds of stats from Fangraphs. What I love about Fangraphs is I can look at so many more stats to try to figure out more about what happened. Knowing a player's zone swing and O swing or everything like that, those are good, right? But what I really want to know is what else was going on. So when you're on a player's player page, right, you just got to click graphs over here. And at first, what you're going to get is like sort of the least effective kind of chart sometimes, which is just how they did year to year. But we don't want that. We know that years, they're not arbitrary, but they're too big. I want to know about more. So tell me by game, right? So we can see that his WOBA over the season got a lot better, right? We know that his strikeout rate, as his strikeout rate went down, what happened? His WOBA went up. As his when his WOBA was down, it's probably because he was striking out way too much, right? These are kind of cool relationships for us to see. A lot of times they're intuitive. Sometimes for certain players, they won't be because they have particular skills or approaches that sort of break the mold. Javier Baez is an example of this, but you get to see exactly how this sort of played out. And you can change the sample size. Now, for Julio Rodriguez, 15 games is going to be pretty good because we know we don't have a big sample for him. But if we went to a player like Mike Trout, who's got thousands of plate appearances, we might increase this from 15 games to maybe 25 or 50, just because sometimes these charts are more valuable the more we can see, right? Like, and the more, we don't want to necessarily see game by game by game for a player that's got tons of games. We have tons of data. But for rookies like Julio Rodriguez, it is really good to see how it happened in a smaller amount of time. They've got really cool stuff like batted ball, plate discipline. You can see how often they got pitched certain types of pitches. You can also look at, rolling standard stats. I don't use that very often, but you can. So these are pretty cool, right? I'm a fan of what Fangraphs has. But here's the thing. What about the PL charts I've been showing you, right? What about that stuff, right? That's the stuff we want. So let's go back to J-Rod. The stats that we've been able to come up with over here at Pitcher List are really cool because they can show me. Remember how you noticed that his strikeout rate kind of got better? You wonder why? Yeah, it's because not only did his contact improve, but his swing aggression went down. So he swung less often compared to how much we think he should have swung at something. And he made more contact when he did swing than we would have expected. You combine those two things, what do you get? You get that WOBA spike that we saw, right? So when we looked at his rolling WOBA, we did see it go up at the end of the season. This is a good reason why. He stopped swinging at things that he probably shouldn't have swung at. And when he did swing, he made more contact. That's a beautiful thing to know because it's not just that, oh, yeah, he hit it better. It's that we know how he got to that. That level of detail is amazing for us as we try to build narratives about these players. What will Julio Rodriguez be this next season? The answer is probably a stud because he's Julio Rodriguez. But we now have better ideas of why, right? He went actually early in the season when he was still good. He was bad at making contact, right? He was below the 25th percentile for quite a bit of the season, right? And we know that he was also really aggressive. Those are terrible combinations to be able to succeed at all with much well below average contact ability and a very, very aggressive approach means you must be really heckin' talented to do that. So as he sort of matured and was like, I don't need to swing at all this stuff. Right. I'd love to know like what happened on this like high part, like what the hitting coach kind of went to him and said, it's like, hey, what if you just didn't do that? Right. Like, what if you just didn't do that? And Julio was like, yeah, sure. Well, I won't. What if I only swung at stuff that was good? Like, that's kind of what we saw. Right. And it was amazing. So that's the kind of stuff we're always looking for. Oh, I'll get to that in just a second. But these are the things that we just really, really want to see. Right. I'm going to go through a bunch of these charts for you. Then real quick, I'll actually let you guys tell me what you want to see and what kind of charts you want to see. But, I'll show you more about what I've been able to do. This is all I've been doing for the last like 2 days. This has consumed my life because I find it like just amazingly fascinating. Right. I know if Paul's still around, he's going to love this. Riley Green, right? He didn't show us a ton. When you just look at his overall, what he did last season, but look how much better he got. Right? Particularly at strike zone judgment, which was how often did he sort of make the right call on if he didn't swing, how likely was it to be a ball? If he did swing, how likely was it to be a strike? Man, he had some real struggles as he adjusted to major league pitching, but he got it, right? And as he got better at that, you see the contact got better because he stopped swinging at garbage, right? These two charts don't always go so closely together, but they do in many cases, and that's because it makes sense, right? The better you are at knowing what a strike is and what you can hit, the more likely you are to actually hit the thing, right? This isn't all rocket science, whatever Kyle Bland is doing is rocket science, but like understanding these charts isn't. You can do that by saying, oh, that makes sense. He's better at understanding what the strike zone is, so he's better at making contact because he only swings at things that are likely to be things he can hit. It makes a lot of sense this way. So if you're not buying into Riley Green, I'm sure you've got reasons. But if you're worried about his ability to understand a major league strike zone and his ability to make contact, I would tell you to maybe think about that a little bit because it looks like he's getting pretty darn good at it. I mean, look at that strike zone judgment. He went from, worse than the bottom barrel of the league to well above average, right? He did this quickly. We see rookies do this sometimes because it does take time to adjust to major league pitching. We talk about this in every podcast, right? Hitters need some time to adjust to guys that have multiple plus breaking balls and that can locate much better than minor league pitching. So it takes time to adjust to that. But Riley Green started making that adjustment. It just wasn't in time to save his overall season batting line. Right. And if he continues to make trends like this, I think we can be very excited, just like we were coming into 2022. Right. We can be very excited. We often like sour on guys because they didn't start out great, but now we can see that they actually grew. The final number didn't look great. Right. For both of them, they are around average. One of them's a little below, but as the season went on, they got better. Right. Another player that I'm sure a lot of people have already recognized is growing a lot. But who is a little bit interesting here is Vinny Pasquantino, right? Vinny P. He actually, so on one hand, the rolling contact ability is sloping down, right? But let's be clear, he always was in the top 10% of the league in contact ability. When this guy swings, he hits the ball, right? He hits the ball even when you think he probably shouldn't hit the ball. He hits the ball, right? He's got an amazing hit tool. You already knew that about Vinny P. You saw his strikeout rate, his walk rate, all that stuff. just confirmed here. He got a little bit worse at it, but did he really? Right? Like, did he really get worse, or did he just kind of get closer to regular elite than completely elite? Fine, right? That's why I love that 90th percentile. Yeah, he went down, but he still stayed amazing, right? He was never below what we'd expect the top 10% of the league to do. That's amazing, right? Vinny Pasquantino, his rolling power. Yeah, it did take a big dip late in the season. We saw that in the numbers, and that one's a little more concerning because we know that he goes from above average, 75th percentile, kind of in that range, to a little bit below. But we also know that he's still kind of in this very average range, right? We know if these are distributed normally, that the difference between the 40th and 60th percentile ain't that much. There's a lot of players that are packed right in there. You can kind of see that if you look up like WRC plus leaderboard, where most of the players, they're kind of between, 80 or really like 90 and 110. There's a ton of players in that range, or like between 80 and 120. They're kind of in there because a lot of these are normally distributed. So he did go down, but it's not like he was like super weak, right? He just ended up being a little bit below average. But he was still able to succeed. How did he do that? Right? Well, he did that because he's amazing at judging the strike zone. And as he went through the league, even though his contact ability got worse, right? His power got worse, he was better at understanding the strike zone. He was better at making the right decision. So even as the contact ability and power went down, the numbers stayed pretty good because he made better decisions. He made the most of the contact he made. He got the most out of the power he could get, even if it went down, right? Those are things we're looking for. By the end of the year, he's got this 90th percentile rolling decision value, which means when he's deciding to swing, he's swinging at the right stuff. And when he's taking pitches, he's taking the right pitches. That's what we want to see. So even though the power kind of goes down and all that, it didn't actually affect his ability to add runs for his team because he was able to take those things in tandem. Yes, he got a little bit worse at making contact. Yes, power became a little harder for him to find, but because he made better decisions, right? And he understood the strike zone better. He was still able to succeed in ways that he hadn't succeeded when he was better at making contact and better at hitting for power, because those other things just matter a lot, right? Being able to swing at the right pitches means a lot. Now we have charts to help you understand whether a player is doing that. So, it's me, so I got to talk about Akil Baddoo a little bit. I did want to talk about why these reference points matter. When you look at that chart on the left, you see that they improve, but it's really hard to get an understanding of how far down to how far up they went by adding these percentiles like Kyle Bland has. It did change sort of the shape of the chart because we wanted you to see that, the difference. This is the difference between the bottom 10% of the league and the top 10% of the league. And he went from one to the other, right? That's amazing, right? When I talk about why I like Akil Baddoo, it's because he's been able to make these kinds of adjustments over time. However, I'm not blind, right? There's only so much this could do for him. He did get better at making contact and he got better at hitting for power, but he never was actually good at it, right? And again, these percentiles help me understand that, yeah, sure, he improved a lot, but it doesn't mean he was good, right? He wasn't good at making contact and he was never good at hitting for power. So yes, all that stuff was great, but I still need to understand the context of that. He improved a ton to still be considerably below average. So not great, right? Not the best, but there's still hope a little bit for Akil Baddoo. But in 12-team leagues, you can just ignore him because he just doesn't make enough contact. He doesn't hit for enough power. Let's also talk about players that make sudden changes. We talked a little about players that grow. Let's talk about players who make sudden changes. Now, if you've looked up Alejandro Kirk at all and his power, his slugging or whatever, you've seen this, right? Everything he does is really front loaded in those those first 200 batted ball events. And then after that, it just falls off the table. But he doesn't just fall off the table. He goes to being worse than 3 out of 4 players at getting extra bases when he makes contact, right? That's horrible. That's not what we want to see, especially from someone who was so good at it. It just turns off, right? So I tried to understand exactly why this happened. I mean, with the other charts, I've been able to help explain why this happened. With Alejandro Kirk, I kind of can't. He always made good decisions, right? And his contact ability stayed really good. Yeah, it got a little bit worse. He went from the top 10% of the league to, still above average. That shouldn't cause this, right? Something else is going on. I don't know what it is, and it scares me. Now, in some cases, this happens and it's nothing to worry about. It's like, yeah, he just couldn't hit the ball quite right. I looked at this guy's ground ball rates, fly ball rates. None of it really explains this loss of power. I don't know what the heck happened. I don't know. I mean, I have to dig deeper. Did pitchers find new ways to pitch him? Did they start throwing to places they know he can't make good contact? I don't know. I want to believe in Alejandro Kirk. And I know that he's got some real skills. He is good at making contact, no doubt about it. He is good at making the right decision. He's, in fact, elite at making the right decision on whether or not to swing. But the power went away. That scares the crap out of me. So, something I think maybe everyone should look into before you draft Alejandro Kirk, maybe get a feeling of why this happened, or at least understand that it happened. Another guy with sudden changes on the same team, Bo Bichette, right? We all know that he really spiked at the end of the year, but see where his season average is? That's that 90th percentile line. Look how much higher he went. That's insane. That's insane because the difference between the MLB average and that 90th percentile is about 1 run added per 100 pitches. He went, almost about 2 runs per 100 pitches over that. So he was like double the difference between MLB average and 90th percentile. He did that increment again towards the end of the season. That's an amazing elite skill. How the heck did that happen, right? It can't be luck. He didn't just happen to hit a whole lot better, right? So I actually kind of figured it out, right? So he started out really, really aggressive. He swung way more at the beginning of the season than he should. And as you can see, it made it a lot harder to make contact. We see these charts sort of go in opposite directions. It's what we want. Right, we want to see he starts swinging less. He still swings a lot, Bo Bichette. He swings a lot, but that's because he's got great hand-eye coordination. And when he swings a lot because he knows he can make contact. Because on average, he was better. He was in the top 10% of the league of making contact. Right, so it's okay for him to swing more because I get to see that he's going to make contact. So he just started swinging a little less. He really let some of the junk pitches go. He was swinging 10 to 12% more often than we expect. And we saw much better results when he's more between like 2 and 5%, right? We didn't need to swing that much. He kind of cuts that way down and we see the contact ability go way, way up. So that was really fun to see. And it helps me understand why he just went off at the end of the year. Helps me understand what that progression looked like. Man, the guy must have been pressing or something because he was swinging a ton and he wasn't making nearly as much contact as we expect, but he fixed it. And that makes me feel really good about Bo Bichette going into next season. We've got Michael Harris II. This guy was really fun to watch all season. What we saw was that he started swinging. He always is aggressive, right? But he went from extremely aggressive to pretty aggressive. And that's great because we also saw at the same time that he made pretty good contact to close to elite contact. Why? Because he let some of those pitches go. He let sort of those fringy pitches that we really don't expect people to swing at. He let those go. Now, if you watched Michael Harris II every day, you might have seen that. Right? But it's hard to really capture that in the stats that we have. The stuff that Kyle Bland has made for us, it really helps us see it right in front of us. Right? And what's also interesting is he never actually got that good at making the right decision. He still swung at stuff he really shouldn't have swung at. He took things he really shouldn't have took and ended up in the bottom 10% of the league in terms of making the right decision. But he's got such great contact ability, it kind of didn't matter. Did it? That drop in aggression, which helped him make more contact, meant he could get away with making poorer decisions. Now, we'd still like to see that get better, right? It's really hard to succeed when you're constantly making the wrong decision, but we at least see that he was able to succeed despite that. And if he can continue to grow, which he did throughout the season, it sort of came down towards the end, but he started to build. That's what we want to see. And that's what I'm going to be watching as we go into next season for Michael Harris II. Is he able to make at least even 25th percentile rolling, that rolling decision value? If he can just be in not the bottom 10%, I think this guy can be really, really special, as many of you probably do too. I'm a Tigers guy, so you had to bring another. Spencer Torkelson. We never really saw what we wanted to see from Torkelson, who's one of the best college hitters of, really this era. And yeah, it was rough, but man, look at the growth. You've heard me talk about this so much. He was always kind of good at understanding the strike zone. He gets to a point where he's close to elite. And what's that help him do? Helps him add bases when he makes contact because he's swinging at the right stuff. He's swinging at things he's supposed to swing at. So we see Torkelson's power go up towards the end of the season. We didn't necessarily see it in the home runs. We didn't necessarily see it in the doubles, but we do see it because he starts adding just a little more and a little more, and it goes with that strike zone judgment. I'm really excited about him heading into next season. I don't want to say he's like a guy you should draft as your starting first baseman in a 15-team league, but he's definitely someone that should be on your radar. There's a ton of ceiling with this player. I really think you should be paying attention to him if you're not already. Adley Rutschman, y'all love him already. What's really interesting about him is that he sort of gets worse at judging the strike zone as we go, right? He starts out really, really elite, and then he kind of just stops being that good at it. He starts actually being quite bad at understanding the strike zone. But his hitter performance kind of doesn't really get hurt, right? I mean, it drops for a little bit, but it stays elite. How the heck does this guy pull that out? How does he swing at things that should be balls this often and keep that good hitting performance? Well, you probably already know this guy makes contact, right? This guy always makes contact. You know why he swings at that other stuff? Because he can hit it. And that's the kind of things I want to see. Yes, it's great to be patient. It's great to take balls or balls, but if you think you can do damage with it, please do, right? Because a single and a double is better than a single, or a double is always better than a walk, because other players can run even further. You're more likely to get an RBI in a single than you are a walk, because there's only one way to get an RBI on a walk, right? And there's lots of ways to do it with a single. So we want to see him with a player with this kind of contact ability. It's okay to be aggressive, right? It's okay to take those swings. Another player is really fun, Lars Nootbaar. I mean, this is just classic, right? This guy got better as the year went on. He made more and more contact. He started out not making very much contact. And of course, he gets close to elite. The rolling power starts a little below average. Then he really starts settling in that top 25% of the league, right? Lars Nootbaar, a guy I really am looking at, not just because he took walks and all that stuff, but because he got better at making contact. And when he makes contact, he got better at hitting it hard. That's everything I want to see in a player. So I'll get to the end of this. So anyone who's still playing that right game doesn't die. But some things are what they are because they constantly change. That's baseball players. They are who they are because of how they change, how they adapt, how they grow. None of these lines are flat. No matter who I pull up, Mike Trout, Juan Soto, guys who have been the same talent all the time, they go up and down because they make adjustments. Pitchers make adjustments against them, and then they make more adjustments to deal with that, right? If you're only using traditional splits to measure their performance, you will always be behind. Anyone that's using rolling charts gets a better idea of how a player is growing and developing than you will just by looking at month by month or half by half or whatever it is. So I want you to get away from that. I want you to at least play with these rolling charts a little bit because it's really important to understanding how things are changing for a player. Are they getting better? Are they getting worse? Are they, how is it happening? Is it like a big spike and then nothing? Right? Because when you looked at the first half and second half for Alejandro Kirk, that's kind of what it looked like. And you'd think, no, there's no way that could be it. And it was. That's actually what happened. He had amazing first half and trash second half in terms of power. It was just gone. Even though he kept making good decisions, it's not like he was expanding the strike zone. He was making great decisions. He was making contact, just couldn't do it. So I really want you all to be thinking about these rolling charts. I really want you to be thinking about, hey, if I want to think that this player is going to get better at something, did they at least get better at it last season? Because we know that they're working on stuff right now that we can't understand, but I hope they got better at it. I can see what happened in season. It's especially good for rookies, but also veterans who did something you didn't expect. See how it happened, right? Was it all front loaded, back loaded? The season long stat won't tell you that. The rolling charts will. So thank you again. I know I've been talking really fast, been saying right a lot. But I'm Scott Chu. I'm the senior analyst here at Pitcher List. I do a podcast every 2 weeks. It'll be every week. Hacks and Jacks. We were a 2021 FSWA Best Baseball Podcast finalist, which was really cool. I consider us the Rookie of the Year because everyone else was like The Athletic and Paul's stuff and Nick's stuff and all that kind of thing. First Pitch Podcast. We have that all season. You should be listening to it. We're giving you box score updates. We're giving you a breakdown of some of the most interesting starts from the day. If you're not listening to First Pitch during the season, you need to be. It's a huge advantage. It's only about 10, 15 minutes. If you turn up the speed, it can be a little bit shorter. You can follow me on Twitter at @IfTheChewFits. I wish I remembered who gave me that handle, but it's my favorite handle I've ever had. So this was so much fun. It's hard for me to really express how excited I am about this stuff that we built. And I'm going to tease you just a little bit to show you that we have all this stuff. It's here. You can pull up all kinds of hitters, right? Aaron Judge, his power should come as no surprise, right? Like he was always way better than the top 10% of the league. And so even if you talk about the ball, any ball they gave him, it didn't matter, right? Because he hit it all. These things are all fun. I'm really excited for you guys to have these after the launch. I really want you to be able to see what these players did, why they did it, right? And just because something didn't happen on here doesn't mean it can't happen. A player that I'll pull up is Corbin Carroll. Oh yeah, he doesn't have enough batted balls, so we'll lower that a little bit. Oh, 50, right. The power was never really there. That doesn't mean he can't have it, right? It just means we didn't have a very big sample. We know that his strike zone judgment, not great, right? It didn't really work out for him. He had a rough go of things when he started in the league. That doesn't mean he can't be good. This is a weird one, and it looks really flat, and it's just because he barely had over 200 swings. But I really hope, again, that you guys get a chance to see this when PL8 comes out. I hope that you get to play with it. And if you can't do that now, go to StatCast, go to Fangraphs. They've got great stuff there. Understand why players ended up where they ended up. I want to know I don't want to just know the final number. I want to know the direction. Did they get better? Did they get worse? Did they stay about the same? That's what I want to know. You can learn so much by looking at these. You can see players' progressions. You can often, I didn't have it. And actually now I want to show it to you real quick. But if you remember our guy, Taylor Ward, I have so many of these saved. Taylor Ward, that power went down. But of course, he was hurt for this part. He played through an injury right here. And when he wasn't feeling that, it got way better, right? These are the kinds of things I want you all to see. I'm really excited that you'll be able to see them soon. If nothing else, I hope what you take away from this is rolling charts are a great tool. You don't need to be a math. I don't know how to make them. If you gave me a spreadsheet and all that stuff, I could not make them, but I can understand them because the way they work is pretty intuitive, right? They move in the direction you kind of want them to move. You just have to know, is it good to have a lot of this stat or a little? Those kinds of things, you can understand them. So go get them, play with them. You can, if you want to hit me up on Twitter and ask me about a rolling chart or to pull one for you, show you how to do it, I'm always happy to do it. I want you to know how to do this because it's not just going to make you better at fantasy baseball. It's going to make following players that much more fun. It has changed the way I look at rookies and how I follow rookies. And I hope you all get to have this excitement I'm having right now. I am bursting out of my jacket here because of how much fun I'm having with this so far and how much more fun I'm going to have with it as the season starts. So thank you all
Scott,
again.
that was
8:00.
that was amazing. Sorry to interrupt you at the end there, but that was incredible. I think everybody watching is just glued to it. Actually, you doing the Taylor Ward rolling chart, I looked down and saw Toby in the background sitting up a little bit closer. And he's like, oh, maybe a little bit Taylor Ward now. Yeah, just a little closer there, Toby. But seriously, that stuff, it's
He made good
eye-opening.
decisions too.
And just the different things that, oh yeah, what do we got here? Sure, why not? What do we have? Decision value improved when he was healthy again, too. This stuff is invaluable. It's just how, I think about how I don't want to talk about hitters a lot because it's really hard to decipher any change in one game. And rolling charts are the answer. The way that I essentially look at pitchers one every 5 days, you can kind of do that with hitters in this way. And oh, I'm so excited to get this in everybody's hands. Thanks so much for outlining it. And it's great to see you, Chu.
Good to see you too, man. Again, huge props to Kyle Bland, the work he's put on this. I mean, just
Oh my
last
God.
night we got those percentiles. I was thinking,
Unbelievable.
oh, that'd be really cool. He put them in last night. It's amazing.
That's
I'm so
that's the
excited for you
fun
guys to
of
get it.
this. Wouldn't that be really cool? Oh yeah, all right. Let's go and do it, and just that quick. Amazing
It's
stuff.
this stuff's fun, guys. This is
It
fun.
is. To the winner of the most funky panelist of PitchCon, take care, Chu. Good to see you.